Welcome to Pushback. I'm Aaron Maté. The U.S. assassination of Qasem Soleimani, a top Iranian military commander, is the culmination of 3 years of Trump administration warmongering against Iran. It began with the sabotage of the Iran nuclear deal and has continued with a number of escalatory steps, none more brazen and potentially catastrophic as this murder inside Iraq. Democratic centrists are criticizing Trump, but they have played a role here too. Back in 2017, with the exception of Bernie Sanders, Democrats in Congress voted for sanctions on Iran that helped Trump kill the nuclear deal. And even recently, Democrats overwhelmingly voted for a massive military budget and helped kill a proposal from Bernie Sanders and Ro Khanna that opposed unauthorized military action against Iran. Well, earlier I spoke to Jamal Abdi, president of the National Iranian American Council. Jamal Abdi, welcome to Pushback. The line given to us by Secretary of State Mike Pompeo is that Qasem Soleimani was planning attacks on U.S. forces, and that was the reason for his assassination. Do you buy that rationale?
Not for a minute. What now? Was Soleimani potentially drawing up plans for further, proxy attacks on U.S. interests and things of that nature? Potentially. Was the U.S. drawing up similar plans? Potentially. This has been a back and forth that has been going on for 3 years now. And the notion that there was some imminent attack in which the U.S. had to take Soleimani out, and by doing so was going to prevent this attack, it defies reason. It's pretty clearly just another lie that has been put out by this administration that really feels like a reverse engineering of a legal basis for this strike that has no actual basis in fact. I assume Pompeo is saying this so that he can claim that this was not illegal under U.S. law and under international law. We know that they have not briefed Congress yet, and so we do not know what is their actual evidence or how much they can substantiate this claim. But I just, if the idea was that they were going to take out Soleimani to prevent strikes, and now they're afraid that there are going to be Iranian retaliatory strikes, the logic just doesn't add up.
So why do you think they did it then?
That is the big question right now. The timing is interesting. I mean, one could look at the chain of events and view this as sort of a pretty massive and disproportionate escalation and retaliation for the protests at the U.S. Embassy in Iraq, which were triggered by U.S. strikes into the country, which were triggered by supposedly Iranian-backed militias killing a U.S. contractor. But like I said, this tit for tat has been going on for quite a while now. And up until now, the Trump administration, or Donald Trump himself, has managed to be both provocative in its rhetoric and in the actions it takes on the economic front in terms of sanctions on Iran, the willingness to designate Iran, and the willingness to talk tough. But when it has come to kinetic action, we all remember Donald Trump was at the brink, supposedly within 10 minutes of striking Iran in retaliation for Iran taking down a drone that Iran claimed was in Iranian airspace. And Trump pulled back and at the time said it was because it would not be a proportionate response. And I think that the subtext was that he understood that it would likely cross a red line towards all-out military confrontation that would likely ensnarl the United States and make a lie of his promise to extricate the United States from the many wars in the region and around the world. Now, apparently, that calculation has changed, and Trump was willing to take even more provocative actions to strike, apparently without the permission of the Iraqis, to strike arguably the second most powerful person in Iran's leadership. And the notion that there was no understanding of the implications of this action is pretty dubious. My own theory is, one of two things. Either one, the United States, and I should qualify this, Donald Trump and the people around him, not the entire US government, certainly not the entire United States, but viewed this escalation cycle with Iran as one in which the United States needed to show such disproportionate force to deter further Iranian aggression and show Iran, the US is not messing around, we're serious, and we're so tough, we're going to kill your top guy. I think that's a very flawed logic, but I can see that argument being made and it being one based on a rational process. The other is that, the Supreme Leader tweeted at Donald Trump earlier this week. He attacked Donald Trump on Twitter, and God forbid you insult our president's ego. I would not rule out that this was the final straw that led Donald Trump to decide, what, I'm being played here. I need to show Iran and the world that they shouldn't mess with me personally. Otherwise, I don't think that there's any plan for how to deal with this. I don't think it's part of any broader strategy. And I certainly haven't heard any articulation from anybody in the administration or any of the supporters of this action within Congress about what comes next and how this actually serves U.S. interests beyond this symbolic, chest beating and this notion that, all that the bad guys understand is strength. And so now we've really showed them through our strength. I haven't heard what the strategy is or what they think is going to happen now.
Two quick things. You mentioned the Ayatollah tweeting at Trump, and Soleimani previously has also tweeted at Trump as well, something provocative along those lines. And I'm wondering if you think here that Soleimani miscalculated, that he didn't think that Trump would do something so brazen, as evidenced by the fact that here he is traveling into Iraq pretty publicly. Apparently it wasn't a secret he was there. He had come from Syria. And traveling alongside in a convoy with a top Iraqi paramilitary leader, leading to the U.S. killing both of them.
Yeah, I do think that this was unexpected on the Iranian side. And, there were apparently plenty of opportunities, at least under previous administrations, to assassinate Soleimani. And we've now heard of instances under Obama and under Bush when there were such opportunities, and the leadership decided it wasn't worth the cost of it, that it would generate this blowback, that it would essentially be a declaration of war. And I think on the Iranian side, the view had been that the United States actually has something to lose by doing this, that the U.S. would not escalate so dramatically because of the enormous costs that could be imposed. And then conversely, with the Iranians, you increasingly see a government and a country that has less and less to lose, an economy that has been completely decimated and isolated from the rest of the world, in spite of Iran making good on its pledges and its commitments under the nuclear deal. So it was sort of, damned if they do, damned if they don't. And so I think on the Iranian side, you started to see an increasing willingness to take big risks and to potentially, gamble with whatever little capital they sort of had left. And so you saw the alleged targeting of tankers and the seizure of the British ship and the alleged strike on the Saudi oil facilities. But even these actions, I think, were calculated to come right up to the line of potentially inviting a U.S. counter-response in the form of, all-out war, direct strikes on Iran or something like that. But right on the brink of that. And with, I think, the intent of putting maximum pressure on the United States, showing the U.S. that there was a cost to the economic warfare and the maximum pressure campaign, but without actually triggering a full-on military conflict. And I think what we see on the U.S. side now with the Trump with the assassination is kind of a calculation of, well, we're just going to do the most aggressive thing possible. Implications be damned. And for that reason, Soleimani apparently, did not take great pains to ensure that he couldn't be tracked by the United States. He is somebody who, Supreme Leader Khamenei would refer to as the living martyr, because he somehow was around after all these years, and because he didn't necessarily fear that he was going to be killed by the United States because of what this would mean and what this would embroil the United States in. And apparently that is now all out of the window. And Donald Trump has shown that, costs be damned, the United States is going to go after Iran. And I think that is actually the inevitable track that we were on when Donald Trump left the nuclear deal and imposed maximum pressure and sort of blocked off possible pathways for a diplomatic solution. I don't think Donald Trump realized it at the time. I think he was sort of goaded along, and now his ego is in play, and he's finally sort of taken the last step to cement this what may be an inevitable military exchange.
All right, and in terms of costs, let's talk about this in the context of ISIS, because you mentioned a term before, Iranian aggression, which is what Iran is accused of around the Middle East by the U.S. and its allies, Saudi Arabia and Israel. But to me, what is called Iranian aggression in this context really is actually Iran's foreign policy of taking steps to defend itself against the U.S. and its proxies, and also against ISIS, which is being fueled by U.S. policies. I don't think deliberately giving rise to ISIS, but I think ISIS was a consequence of U.S. policies, starting with the invasion of Iraq and then growing with the proxy war in Syria. So can you talk about what Soleimani meant for the fight against ISIS and what his murder might mean for ISIS's potential resurgence now?
Yeah, I do think that I think you're right about the term Iranian aggression. I mean, I condemn all acts of violence and think that this cycle of escalatory violence and war, and whichever side it's on, is self-perpetuating, and there needs to be a short-circuiting of this vicious circle. That being said, Iran clearly is the weaker party when it comes to military power, whether it's the United States or the U.S. allies in the region, Israel, which has hundreds of nuclear weapons, or the Saudis, whose defense budget dwarfs Iran's. And so the very much defensive strategy of Iran has been to utilize these proxy forces, regional militias, in some cases with Hezbollah, the archetype for this. In other cases, more coordinated or less coordinated. But this is, with all due respect to my government in the United States, this is Iran's backyard. And so the idea of Iran being the aggressor against a foreign military, I think, is at least worth a debate. And inside Iran, even as we've seen kind of two different poles inside the country, we've seen in recent weeks these massive protests where people who are fed up with the economic situation in Iran and fed up with the corruption in the Iranian leadership, and how this economy has these major winners who are usually connected with the Revolutionary Guard or with the elite levels of the government, and then these losers who are continuing to struggle and can't even get access to basic goods and medicine because, in large part, U.S. sanctions, along with the corruption. And so you see, the opposition to the Iranian government and the entire Iranian regime sort of increasing inside of Iran, and increased willingness by people to turn out and to protest and demonstrate, and even in some cases resort to violence, which and then the Iranian government responded with violence. So you have this pent up feeling inside of Iran. The other poll, though, has been that inside of Iran, a lot of people saw these protests and were really scared because they see what's happening in the region. They've seen what's happened in the region over the past several years, and the rise of ISIS, and the potential disintegration of Iran, the potential for Iran falling into a civil war or an ethnic conflict and turning into a Syria. And I think both saw the protests as something that were justified, but very dangerous for the future of the country. And sort of, you stick with the devil you know. And Soleimani is somebody who actually, according to polling conducted by the University of Maryland, I think polled at something like 80% approval inside of Iran. He was the most popular figure inside of the country because, in spite of the fact that he was an entrenched part of the ruling establishment and a hardline figure who helped train and operationalize the repressive elements that were used domestically inside of Iran to clamp down on repression, and who, for all intents and purposes, is affiliated or leads a group that has benefited from the sanctions and the conflict with the United States. And yet still, he was viewed as somewhat of a protector of Iran, or the protector of Iran. He was the one who defeated ISIS, who prevented Iran from falling into the conflicts that had engulfed the rest of the region.
Finally, your group, the National Iranian American Council, has been very active in Washington. That's where you are. In drumming up congressional and public support for the Iran nuclear deal and trying to save it. I want to ask you specifically about Democrats, whether you think that they have done enough to try to defend what was a signature Obama administration policy. I'm thinking now especially of back in 2017 when Congress, including Democrats, united, except for Bernie Sanders and Rand Paul, to pass new sanctions on Russia, North Korea, and Iran. And Bernie Sanders at the time warned that he was opposing that measure because he wanted to save the Iran nuclear deal, but he couldn't get any other Democrats to go along with it. I'm wondering, do you think Democrats have done enough to try to save the Iran nuclear deal from collapse, which at this point now, I wonder if you agree or not, the collapse of which seems inevitable?
I do agree that the collapse of the Iran deal is probably, I don't want to rule anything out, and I think that there's still, I think right now this is, for me at least, a moment that demonstrates how much of an imperative it is to, for Donald Trump to lose his election in 2020 and for the next president to be somebody who will fully repudiate what this guy has done, including his policy towards Iran, and try to patch back together some pathway towards a political solution. But as far as what the Democrats have done, Russia has been the great lubricant for all of the stuff Trump actually wanted to get done, and all the stuff that people around Trump wanted to get done. So, you mentioned the Iran sanctions that were passed in 2017. I, in a conversation with a very senior Democrat, the most senior Democrat, was told that, my concerns about the Democrats passing or signing on to those sanctions and combining them with Russia's sanctions was going to give Trump a pass to eventually abandon the Iran deal and, sort of neuter the Democrats' ability to stand up to Donald Trump against that by encouraging him to, continue with more and more sanctions. And I was told, no, Donald Trump's not going to leave the nuclear deal. It's all posturing. It's never going to happen. It's not going to happen. Full stop. And so, as much as, people in Washington and around the country say this is not normal and Donald Trump has to be treated as a special type of threat, it has been very much business as usual. And even with, now we're doing this impeachment thing, and we're going to be doing the impeachment while Donald Trump is marching us off the cliff to war. So I really think that, on things like the nuclear deal and with his Iran policy, there was an opportunity to be strong and to kind of, everyone has to put their foot down and say, we're not going to allow you to sort of breach, to even flirt with breaching this deal. And by kind of sending these mixed signals and really perpetuating the politics that provide the kindling for these types of activities. Like by the Democrats turning Iran sanctions once again into good politics, actually helped lay the groundwork for Donald Trump to end the deal and then escalate these sanctions and now potentially start this war with Iran that we've been warning about for so long. And it really makes you think that there's got to be, with the Democratic majority taking over, there still hasn't been this real recognition of what we're up against. And so it really makes you think that whoever the nominee is and who the next president is needs to take this seriously and not treat this as business as usual or something where you can compromise with the politics that Donald Trump is engaged with. But that, we need to, if Democrats are for the nuclear deal and against a war with Iran, then be for those things. Don't try to have it both ways. I do think that, they've come a long way from where they were before the nuclear deal. And I think that the nuclear deal, the battle to get it through Congress actually really did turn it into a partisan issue and did firm up Democrats in not so consistently reverting to Iran bashing in order to gain politically. But they still haven't been rid of that inclination fully. And hopefully this is the wake-up call and we start to see some real actions, including, forcing some votes on legislation to block Donald Trump, or at least make very clear that Donald Trump does not have the authority to start a war with Iran and to really box this administration in from escalating any further. Right now, only Congress and the 2020 candidates, I think, the sort of political and institutional power to make that happen.
Jamal Abdi, president of the National Iranian American Council, thank you very much.
Thank you, Aaron.